Hello again, it's Artstiva, and I'm back with another development vlog for L4D The Return. I'm gonna be placing this over footage of me scrolling through the thumbnails I've made for episodes, and even a little first episode early production work, just so I can kill two birds with one stone. The last vlog, I didn't say a whole lot about the story outside of the sole premise, which was getting the two groups of remaining survivors back together again. So without dabbling too much into spoiler territory, I'll give a little bit more detail about what's going on in these 3 episodes. Before I do though, if you want to follow live updates on the project, I post frequently about it on my Instagram story. I'll link my Instagram down below in the description. Okay, so story details. We'll just take this on an episode by episode basis, because there's quite a bit to this. Episode 1 picks up with the first group of survivors. Last we saw of them in-game was at the end of the passing, saying goodbye to the Savannah survivors. After Lewis is better healed from his leg injury, they finally leave the bridge, take the sailboat, and go on the river in pursuit of the keys. This is the point where the story breaks away from the canon ending set up in the Sacrifice comic. Their boat gets damaged in a rainstorm, and they're forced to dock at a river island. They find shelter in the house on the island, but they learn that the keys are in military hands. As if that wasn't bad enough, the supplies in the boat are ruined, and supplies in the house are low. Will they be able to make this island work for their needs? Or will they face a future back amongst the zombies without Bill? This episode has been fully thumbnailed and is ready for production. I enjoyed working on it because this part of the overall story allows for more moments of rest for the survivors, as well as moments of reflection. Zoe's flashback also shows the events of the passing from her and her fellow survivors' perspectives, which is pretty cool. Initially, as I was writing, I debated over which group of survivors to start off with in the first episode. It would make sense to start with the second group, since their fate has been up in the air for over a decade, but I realized for the story I was trying to tell, and for all of the elements to come together, it was better to start off with the first group. Again, this episode had the chance for more quieter moments and for characters to process things like the apocalypse itself, Bill's death, and the events of the passing. Which leads me to episode 2, where we follow the second group of survivors. After New Orleans turns out not to be the safe haven everyone thought it would be, the survivors run across the bridge for military rescue. After Nick sows seeds of uncertainty about the rescue in his fellow survivors' heads, the helicopter goes down after a tank attacks it. They crash into the wilderness, and together with the pilot, who lives this time, they must reach the military compound they were headed to before a brutal storm kicks in. Can they survive long enough to make it to the compound? And even if they reach it, will their troubles finally be over? As of writing this vlog, I'm still very much in the early stages of thumbnailing this episode. It's almost twice as long as the first one, simply because there's a lot going on. Not only am I having to work through more action sequences than the last episode, I'm also balancing scenes that establish characters before the apocalypse. That's right, I'm trying to do for these survivors what the Sacrifice comic did for the others. For this process, I gleaned everything I could from the character bios and lore on the game to create sequences that showed what these characters were up to, and in some cases, what kind of people they used to be before the apocalypse. I won't go into too much detail on them here, but for now, I'll just say that I think the saddest backstories in my opinion are those for Coach and Ellis. Unlike Nick or Rochelle, they're both just regular on-the-ground folk who don't really know what's going on or have any insight that could give them an advantage. I'm about to thumbnail Coach's flashback during the bridge finale, and it's probably going to be the saddest thing I've ever drawn since Bill's death and the Sacrifice flashback. Oh, and for anyone who was wondering, yes, Keith will be making an appearance in Ellis's flashback. Then there is the third episode, and for now, I can't talk a whole lot about it without going into obvious spoiler territory. But for this episode, I watched the first game's cinematic intro to get inspiration on crafting the thrilling turning point in the overall story. Obviously, the Sacrifice comic gave me a lot of ideas for slower, more fleshed out bits of development while still advancing the story. It should go without saying, too, that the SFMs of BG Bean and the Apostle 7 have given me so much inspiration. Their attention to details, acting, cinematography, and creating a narrative experience out of a first-person shooter game has helped me both in the script and at the drawing board. I'll link their channels in the description below. You should really check out their work if you haven't already. I don't think I'd have been able to make this story half the beast it is without analyzing their videos for hours on end. The lore series provided by WoWsuch Gaming and the Left 4 Dead wiki were huge resources in crafting story, characters, and checking with the world set up in the game as well. And of course, looking at films like 28 Days Later and Shaun of the Dead helped tighten things like aesthetic, pacing, and editing. Oh, and I also listened to the Vogue podcast's interviews with the voice actors for Francis, Lewis, and Ellis. These really helped in developing story and character through an actor's mentality, especially straight out of the mouths of the people who played the characters themselves. Well, I got a lot of work ahead of me, so I'm gonna say that's a wrap on this vlog. Artstiva over and out.